When I think about the best tropes in anime, I typically think of the underpowered MC who becomes OP with a never-ending mind games between the protagonist and antagonist. They add an element that anyone can appreciate. One of the worst anime tropes I can't stand is villains turn to good guys or the inner demon. Not saying that there isn't cases where this isn't great, it's just very rinsed and repeat. Villains don't always need to be misunderstood or have change of hearts, because that's just not always the case. Sometimes them just having one way of thinking and nothing will change that brings a more authentic feeling to the story. So let's dive into what makes one of the worst tropes, in some cases where it was executed excellently. An anime that is guilty of rinsing and repeating this process is none other than Naruto, and theirs is a bit unique. Maybe Talk no Jutsu was supposed to be his greatest asset, but it still doesn't change the overuse of the misunderstood villains. And this may sound very backwards, but the ideology of the main villains all have been great. Madara, Obito, Gaara, Pain, Itachi, and even Sasuke. Every perspective has made me understand their actions and even justifying some of them, particularly Obito, because his goal was ultimately to force the shinobi world into true peace. But this is the issue with this trope. The things they had to do to even accomplish these goals were obviously wrong, yet most of the time they're forgiven like it's nothing. Kakashi is sitting here with Sakura, trying to heal him even after he was the reason Neji, Minato, Asuma, and Jiraiya died. Granted, it was a game of manipulation from Madara to Black Zetsu to Kaguya, but they probably didn't even know that. And to be honest, I still don't blame him for forgiving him, simply because he had the right intentions with the wrong execution. Like I said before, Naruto villains are a unique case, because although they did use this trope far too many times, it was crucial for character development and helped strengthen the structure of the plot. And the only reason Naruto gets a pass is because every villain who changed basically died. Outside of Kuruma, who was not necessarily a villain, but was portrayed as one for a long time. And that's a great example of the worst tropes done right. An example of it that it was done wrong is Dragon Ball with Vegeta. This is the same guy who basically pulled up and called the death of 3 Z fighters. On top of that, he was a genocidal ruler who destroyed planets for fun sometimes. The reason I say sometimes is because most of the time he would do it out of the fear of being killed by Frieza. But look at him destroying the planets. He's clearly having a good time. I mean, I like Vegeta. In fact, he's probably my favorite character in Dragon Ball, but his actions can't just be overlooked. I tried giving him the benefit of the doubt because he was corrupt by Frieza, and then he purposely gets taken over by Babidi. He had us thinking he was just flat out being controlled, but he wasn't. He even went as far as killing hundreds of innocent bystanders to get Goku's attention. And the main reason this is so overlooked is because with Dragon Ball, no one is truly dead. Anyone can be just wished back, and it kind of excuses the actions of most. But Vegeta has done a lot. Some would say it's because of his circumstances, but it gets to a point where this is really who he is. Dragon Ball did redeem themselves with Black Frieza, and I'm glad they did this because after the tournament, I was worried he might turn into the other side. But Vegeta is a prime example of the worst trope. An example of this trope done to near perfection is Sukuna. From the jump, Sukuna is an evil entity that Yuji must contain. He's targeted by most people in the Jujutsu society because of Sukuna. And from first glance, you think they're pulling this straight from Naruto's playbook, but it's actually quite the opposite. Sukuna is simply pure evil and nothing more. With Kuruma, he was never evil and hasn't done anything to hurt anyone intentionally. Versus Sukuna, he massacred an entire city and left Yuji with that burden. He made Yuji suffer every chance he got, not something you typically see with the inner demon tropes. For instance, in Black Clover, Asta's demon would help him from time to time again. It was for his own selfish reasons as well, but he eventually came to terms with Asta, whereas Sukuna only allowed Yuji to live because he knew he would take over Megumi's body. And after he did, Sukuna bullied Yuji and killed 90% of the cast. An interesting fact about their relationship as well is Sukuna has only called him by his name twice. He respected everyone outside of him. It was only when Yuji finally beat him into nothing that he called him his name again. And even on his deathbed, Yuji agreed to just let him stay dormant within him, but Sukuna refused. Up until his demise, he remained an evil cursed spirit who'd rather die than submit. And it was great that Gege chose this route, because it matched exactly who Sukuna was. My Hero also did a similar take with All For One. He was a villain just like Sukuna, no bad backstory, just evil. All For One wanted to cause chaos around the world and did anything he wanted to. With this being a hero show, my first thought was, there's going to be a moment where they sympathize with him, but not at all. They kept him true to himself and his name. Wanted to make Shigaraki the final villain everyone hated, when in reality, he was the true tyrant. All For One stayed this way up until his final breath, not being humanized as some kind of misunderstood hero, a great ending for a villain of his caliber. Demon Slayer's antagonists never turned into good guys, but they were at least humanized. An example of this is with Akaza and Kokoshibo. Spoiler warning for anime only, but they both realized they were more human than they thought. It just took them fighting for the wrong side to figure that out. They didn't ruin the story either with them helping to fight Muzan, they just ended up taking themselves out. And that was way better than them actually switching sides, because they knew they were too far gone and the only redemption was the easy way out. The parallels between Akaza and Tanjiro was evident because they are both victims of grief and loss and displays how circumstances can really change an outcome. Same thing can be said for Kokushibo, who was desperate for power, so he chose to side with Muzan. With Muzan's influence, it makes it hard to truly see any one of the demons as an antagonist because the lines between good and evil is blurred. Demon Slayer excelled at backstories, and it made the villain into good guy trope a lot different, because it was too subjective to distinguish which side they were on in the end. When you talk about villains who stayed villains, you have to bring up Aizen, one of the greatest manipulators in anime. He had a god complex and never once believed anyone was above him. With that being said, he did help the Soul Society in a fight against the Quincy's, and without going into too much detail, he still remained the same old Aizen. Still wanted to reform the Soul Society's outdated systems and believing he should be the new Soul King. It's pretty fitting of him though, because he went from a good guy to a villain and never switched back, unlike other characters. But the one anime that takes the cake for having endless change of hearts is the friendship anime Fairy Tail. There was at least 10 separate occasions where someone is introduced as a villain but later becomes a good guy. Like Gagio, he was part of the first guilds to oppose Fairy Tail, and then eventually he just joins them. Same thing with Juvia, she was part of that guild as well, but now she puts her life on the line for Fairy Tail. But I think the worst part of all of them is Zeref, the terror of the show. The person who was supposed to destroy the world, and he just sacrifices himself in the end? Not very eventful at all. Zeref was portrayed as the curse of the world, the worst being alive, and he goes and saves the world he sought to destroy? Yes, this show is all about power of family and friendship, but there has to be a cutoff, otherwise it just becomes predictable. I had a feeling Zeref would redeem himself towards the end too, because Fairy Tail never allows anyone to truly just be evil, which is why this was a prime example of one of the worst anime tropes. And just to be clear, I'm not bashing these shows in any way. It's just my honest opinion. Every show I named was a great anime with other great elements, which is what led to their success. It's just sometimes the trope is used too loosely and makes the plot less interesting. But anyways, make sure y'all sub up.